This is the Flory 34 series sweeper, and in this video what we're going to go over is the proper adjustment of the machine. We're going to go over how to operate it and operate it safely, and we're also going to go over some basic maintenance. So first things first is we're going to adjust the head. First thing you need to do is grab this tool that's hanging up behind the cab, and we're going to work on the back side of the head right here. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab this linchpin, remove that, take out the L pin, and your adjustment's going to start right here. Now we've got adjustments on the left side and the right side of the machine, and the adjustments are going to be the same. If you're going to raise the head up, you're going to rotate this handle clockwise, and if you want to lower the head, you're going to rotate the handle counterclockwise. Now, before we do any of this, it's important to know that one, we need to be on a flat surface, and two, we need to check our tire pressures. So the front tires are going to be about 18 to 20 psi, and the rear tires are going to be 25 psi. If it's a brand new machine, chances are these tires will be overinflated for shipping, so make sure you check the tire pressures before we do anything, and then we can get into the head. All right, so we've got the head on the ground. This is a nice flat surface to start with, so get up underneath here and let me show you what we're going to look for. So the first thing we want to do, we've got 5 time bars right here. We want to make sure that one of them is at its lowest point. So you want to get down here and you want to rotate this head when these risers are equal with each other at the top, or this end plate right here, this edge of this end plate is parallel with the ground. Okay, that's when we know that 5th time bar is at its lowest point. So what we're looking for here is we've got wire teeth in the front and we've got rubber fingers here in the back. Now these rubber fingers hang down just a little bit further than the wire teeth. So we're looking at the wire teeth, and we want to make sure that these wire teeth are about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch off the ground. And the rubber teeth, which hang lower, will be doing the work in the dirt. And the purpose of this is these wire teeth push the bulk of the material, and the rubber fingers actually will get in the uneven parts of the ground, the cracks, the crevices, the ruts that might be in the dirt. So it's important here at the beginning of each day when we're in a new field to get here and make this measurement. So I would look at this, and you got to make sure we're looking at left and right side both. We can't just check one side. So this head right here is actually probably a bit on the low side, so I'm going to make that adjustment, and then I'm going to show you what it should look like. So I've got the head lowered down on the ground, and now I need to check the height of these wire teeth. So I'm looking at these wire teeth, and I'm seeing how far off the ground they are, and I just like to use kind of a finger width as a good gauge, at least place to start. So right here, this is perfect. Those wire teeth are just scraping the top of my finger. I need to make sure I'm checking the left and the right side of the machine to make sure these are level. And then once I get that set the way I want to, we should be good to go. Now, once I get in the field, I need to check it again. So a good practice to do is get this set right on a shop floor or a nice flat surface, get in the field, start sweeping about 3 or 4 trees, pick the head up, get out of the cab, look behind the machine, see if you're missing any nuts. If you're not, raise the left and right side, maybe 1 or 2 turns, sweep some more. If you're not missing any nuts, raise it again, and go until you start missing nuts, and then give both sides 1 turn down, and you know you're just right on top of the surface. And of course, you're only as good as your orchard floor. So if you take the time and float your orchard floor, you're going to be able to get those heads adjusted just right. You're going to put less dirt in the windrow, you're going to put less wear and tear on your machine, and of course your harvester and your elevator and all that is going to haul less dirt down the line. So it's really important that we take the time to adjust this machine right, because it's going to affect everything else down the line. Now, one last adjustment on this head, at least it looks like an adjustment, is this top link right here. So this top link is set from the factory. These heads are pitched forward about 2 to 3 degrees, and you should not have to mess with this. The only time that you need to mess with this is if you actually completely remove the head from the machine and you're reinstalling it. So keep this left alone. You shouldn't have to worry about it. Once you get the head set right, make sure you reinstall the L pin and the linch pin. That way these adjustments can't spin on their own, and this head should be good to go. The last adjustment we're going to make on this machine is with the blower spouts. So let's take a look and see what we do. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to adjust the height of this rear spout from the cab. That control is on the joystick. So you're going to raise and lower this spout depending on whether you got berms or flat ground, double line drip, all that matters. So from the cab, you're going to adjust the height of this spout, and then this front spout hanging by a chain is along for the ride. So what you'll do is take this wing nut off, get a little slack in the chain, and find out exactly where you want this thing to sit, and then lock it in. Reinstall your wing nut, and now it's set. Now let me tell you what we're looking for so we know what we're trying to do with the different heights of these spouts. So you got to think of these spouts as working together and make sure they're not opposing each other. So we've got airstream coming right out here out of this boot, okay? That's going to give us the initial push on these nuts. So as you can imagine, we got air coming out of here. That's going to start the push, moving these nuts across the other side of this berm. Now this top section of this front spout is also going to assist in that, and we want to make sure that these two airflows are not opposing each other. So as you can see, I've got these kicked up just a little bit. Now let's talk about that adjustment of those real quick. A crescent wrench, really handy tool to keep inside the cab. Anytime these wing nuts get a little tight, I can use this crescent wrench on them to loosen them up, loosen these vanes, and a 1/2 inch wrench will work on these vanes. You shouldn't have to adjust these vanes too often, but keeping those tools in the cab is going to make life a lot easier. So I've got these vanes kicked up, and what they're doing is they're basically going to be the secondary push of these nuts. So once I run out of air from that bottom spout, now these are going to pick up where this left off and continue that push, okay? And then once this air runs out, this is where the rear spout comes into play. Now I should have this air adjusted to where as I run out of air from my front spout, now this rear spout is picking up where that left off. And hopefully I'm getting those nuts up the berm with my front spout, and my rear spout is taking care of the top side of the berm and the back side of the berm. Now, it's really important to take the time to make these adjustments. From the cab on the 34 series, you're able to see all of this from the cab and be able to make these adjustments. The other important thing to keep in mind is this blower, my ability to clean the berm dictates how fast I can sweep. So if I can gain a 1/2 mile an hour by taking the time to get this set right, in a 10-hour day I've just gained 5 miles. And in a season I've gained about 300 miles. So keep that in mind. The importance of getting this adjusted right at the beginning of the day will pay off dividends throughout the entire season. Now, one other adjustment we can make, actually there's a few more adjustments we can make. The other is, one is the airflow. If I don't want maximum airflow, there's two ways I can kind of throttle that airflow down. One, I can turn the engine speed down. Now we don't want to see that engine speed get below 1900 RPM. So I can turn the engine speed down. Now that will affect some other things. That will affect all the hydraulics on this machine, which means my machine will slow down and the reel will slow down, the head. So I've got to adjust for that if I'm going to lower the engine speed. The other adjustment we can make is the damper doors in here that open and close off our airflow. Now I can partially open those doors and cut off the airflow and have less air coming out here. That's got its pros and cons. In some situations that might work great. In others, that air might come out not really in a straight pattern, maybe got a little swirl to it, and that might scatter the nuts instead of move them in a uniform direction. So there's a few things that you can play with to try and figure out what's going to work best, but in most scenarios you're going to want maximum airflow, okay? Now, one other adjustment that I want to talk about is these front spouts and V'ing those out. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if I take my crescent and I loosen this wing nut, okay, I've got the ability on the front and the rear to V those out. Now the question I get asked a lot, why would I ever want to do that? Well, if I can get away with it, and not every situation I can, but if I can get away with it, V'ing these out will help me clean on the back side of the tree. Now let me show you how that might work. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at this tree right here, okay? And I'm gonna be sweeping in this direction, and I'm gonna be blowing that way. So if my front spout is V'd out in this direction, and my rear spout is V'd out in this direction, as I approach this tree, my airflow is gonna come through in this direction here and clean off this side of the tree. And then as I pass this tree, my rear spout is gonna hit it at a back angle here, and hopefully what we're trying to do is clean the back side of this tree, so when we come around the other side to sweep, we don't have to worry about getting these nuts here next to the tree. So in some situations you can get away with that. If you got a heavy crop or if you got some steep berms, you're probably not going to be able to do that. You're going to need maximum airflow perpendicular to the machine just to get them over some drip lines or over a steep berm. But play with it, see what you can get away with, and it will really make a big difference on how fast you can sweep, and it's going to make a big difference on that return pass. All right, now let's talk about how to operate this machine and also talk about how to operate it safely. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look inside the cab here and go over the controls, and then we'll go over how it works and what we're trying to do with it. So here on the dash we've got our AC control, we've got our hazard lights, we've got our work lights, and we've also got our travel lights. Now the difference is, for work lights, we've got headlights, we've got lights in the rear, but when we're traveling down the road, we just want the road lights on. So we're road legal, and we just got our headlights on. We've also got high-low gear right here, indicated by rabbit and turtle, and we've also got a rocker switch that is our parking brake, and the P will light up when the parking brake is engaged. Now on the joystick, pretty much everything you're going to need to do as you're operating this machine is going to be right here. There's really no reason to be taking your hand off this joystick once we have everything set where we want to, okay? So on this joystick, we've got the head up and down. These two middle buttons right here is to raise and lower the head. When I hit the up button, I've got to hold down on it to raise the head all the way, okay? As soon as I let go, that head is going to stop. Now, the opposite is true for the down button. As soon as I hit that down button, that head is going to free float until it reaches bottom. The other buttons on here are for the blower. So we've got our spouts up and down right here on the right side of the joystick. Now again, that is just the rear spout that I'm moving up and down, and then the front spout is hanging off of a chain and it's along for the ride. So we've got our up and down for the spout here, and then on the left side of the joystick here, I've got that open and close for the dampers on the blower. So that's shutting off the air or turning it on. Now that takes about 2 to 3 seconds for those doors to completely open or completely close. So get used to the timing of that. So then when you want the air completely on, you don't have that door partially open. So hold down on it 2 or 3 seconds. You will be able to hear that hydraulic high-pitched noise when that cylinder reaches the end of its stroke. And then we also, of course, you can also bump it when we want those doors partially open, partially closed. Now, the other adjustment on here is the reel speed and turning the reel on and off. On and off for that reel is this button on the back side of the joystick. Now, you should be able to leave that head on the whole day. When you make your turns, the head goes up, but you can leave the head on, make your turn, drop the head back down. The reel speed goes from 0 to 10. In most scenarios, somewhere between 5 and 6 is plenty fast. We don't need to max out this reel speed. The faster that reel goes, the more turns it's making, the more amount of dirt it's putting into the windrow, and more wear and tear it's putting on our machine. So we should dial that reel speed back as far as we can to where it will keep up with our ground speed and not miss any nuts. Usually between between 5 and 6 is just right for this for these machines. Now, some things to note when we're sweeping. Anytime that we stop the machine, we want to pick the head up, and we want to back up a couple feet. Never do we want to back up with that head on the ground. We can do some damage to it. The other things that we want to think about as we're operating this machine, think about the design intent, is everything on this machine is going to be on your right side, okay? Your controls are on your right side. The trees are going to be on your right side, so your vision, what you're looking for, is out here in the front on the right and over your right shoulder at the blower to see how it's doing. So all your vision and all your concentration is going to be right here on the right side of the machine. Okay, here on the display screen, what you're going to see is the tachometer here in section 2, and then we've got all of our gauges right here. In the top corners is where any of the warning icons are going to show up. So you've got 2 screens that you can toggle between. The first screen is going to be really your most important gauges. So things like fuel level, engine temp, the ground speed of the vehicle, oil pressure. We've got also the air filter restriction indicator right here. And we'll talk more about that later in the maintenance section, but I at least want to point out where it's located on the display screen. Now on the secondary screen, things like battery voltage, fuel rate, engine hours, engine load. So these engines run 90 to 95% engine load. That's where they're most happy. So don't be alarmed if you see this thing running close to 100%. And it looks like oil pressure also on there. So you basically just have 2 screens that you can toggle between on your gauges. These machines are equipped with a reversing fan. Every 10 minutes for 10 seconds, the airflow will reverse and clean out the back grill on the machine. Now I suggest that just about every scenario we should go ahead and let that process take place on its own. If there is ever a scenario where we have some really heavy leaf buildup on that back grill, we've got a manual purge button right here. So we can manually reverse that fan anytime we want. But again, it's suggested that we go ahead and let the 10-minute cycle do its thing. And once in a great while, if we really need to clean it off, we can do that here with this button. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the regeneration process. So on that display screen in the top right corner, anytime that this engine is in the regen process, that icon in that top right corner will start to blink. Now most operators get concerned every time they see an icon blinking on the screen. So let your operators know that this is okay. We need to go ahead and let the machine do its thing. The regen process is cleaning out the DPF on the engine, and we need to go ahead and continue to operate just as normal, just as nothing is happening, okay? If we get in the habit of turning off the machine every time we see that regen in process, eventually this engine will derate. So if it's break time and that process is still happening, go ahead and park the machine, but let it continue to idle. The engine will go ahead and ramp up and ramp down and do what it needs to do to clean out that DPF. If it is at the end of the day and the regen process has not finished, it is okay to stop it, and it will pick back up the next morning when you restart the machine. But again, don't get in the habit of turning off that engine every time you see the regen in process. It will not affect the performance of the machine. It is designed to do that during operation. So get familiar with it. There's a nice big icon on the dash in English and Spanish. So make sure the operator is completely familiar with that process and what they're looking for when the regen is in process. Okay, a couple things about safety on this machine. First, we have a magnetic door switch here on the cab. So any of those functions that we talked about as far as the reel being on or off, or the propulsion on the machine, all of those functions will stop as soon as this door is open and this connection is lost. Once this door is closed, that joystick has to be returned back to neutral in order for us to be able to go again. Also note, anytime we exit the machine while it's still on, engage that parking brake. Another thing that we want to avoid doing is when those blowers are on, don't walk in front of those blowers. They can kick up rocks and dirt and sticks, and potentially dangerous. And of course, anytime the engine is on, we don't need to be around the engine with the doors open. Stay away from all moving parts. Okay, now we're going to go over some basic maintenance on this machine to make sure we can keep it going throughout the season. So first, let's go over the grease points. Okay, so daily grease points down here on the rear axle. These grease points are kind of out of sight, so sometimes out of mind. So let's make sure that we know their location. We've got 2 grease points here. We got one right here, and then we've got one here on the opposite side. Now those grease points we want to hit daily. It's a brass bushing in there, so we can't over grease it. So once a day, we need to be hitting those grease points 1 or 2 pumps a day. Then over here, we've got 4 grease points. Now we talked about earlier in the video, we talked about those doors opening and closing. Well, there's a pivot point for those doors. So over here, we've got 2 grease points here, and there's one right here. Now, those 2 grease points usually get hit. The problem is we've got the same exact opposite on the bottom side of these spouts. So underneath this spout, there's another grease point for the front and the rear spout. What happens is these grease points get forgotten about, and you'll get by the first season with no problem. They'll sit over the winter, and the first time that you go to open or close one of these doors, that damper shaft will twist and you're down first day, because that point has seized up because it never received any grease. So we got 4 daily grease points for the 2 doors here. And then over here in the front, our steering arms, left and right, we've got a grease point here, and we've got another grease point below down here. Okay, so we're hitting those daily as well. So those are 10 daily grease points that we need to be hitting. Now, once a week, depending on your conditions, maybe twice a week, we need to get grease here on our depth adjustment. So we've got the depth wheel and the depth chain on this side. We need to hit this with grease, okay? And another good practice is after we're finished greasing this and we've got our head set right, take some grease and wipe it around this top right here and kind of create a seal so we don't get dirt down into those threads and really gunk it up. So we've got some 2 grease points here that need to be hit at least once a week. And we've also got grease points over here on this lift shaft. So we've got 3 bearings on our lift shaft, here, here, and here. And we want to hit those about once a week, once every 2 weeks should be fine. Those bearings aren't doing a whole lot, but we just want to make sure that we're not over greasing them and breaking the seals. But about once every 2 weeks is just about right. Okay, now let's talk about the filtration, the air filter on this machine. As you guys know, these machines run in a really harsh, dusty environment. So taking care of our air filter properly is going to really save the life of this engine, and you're going to get the most out of it. So air filter is located back here. To remove the cap, we pull this yellow tab right here. Rotate it counterclockwise just a bit, and this cap will come off. Okay. Now, what we have in here, what those machines will come with, is a blue Donaldson air filter. Couple things to know about this. One, if you replace this air filter with anything but a Donaldson air filter, you will void the warranty on these machines. They have to be a Donaldson brand air filter. Now, I suggest you stick with the blue. There's blue ones and there's white ones. The blue ones are a little bit more money, but they hold a lot more dirt than the white ones do. And the benefit is we want to be in these machines or in these air filters as little as possible. These Tier 4 final engines cannot handle hardly any dust intake, so we want to make sure that we're in this as little as possible. So if we got an air filter that can hold more capacity, we should be getting it. Also to note, when we were looking at that display screen, we pointed out the restriction indicator. We're going to let that restriction indicator on the display screen tell us when it is time to replace one of these filters. We're looking for 20 inches. So when we see 20 inches, we'll get a warning on that display screen that says it's time to change that air filter. that's when we want to change this thing. We don't want to be in the old habit of once a day or once every 2 days. The air filtration system on this, the pre-cleaner box on this, is a lot better than your older sweepers. So get used to letting the display screen tell you when it is time to replace one of these filters. And I am using the word replace, not clean, okay? If we clean these, if we blow them out or knock them out, again, we avoided the warranty on these machines. So these filters are to be replaced and not cleaned. Every 3 filter replacements, we're going to be replacing the safety filter here. Whenever we get into this air filter and we open this up, we want to make sure that we're in a clean environment. We don't got machines around us creating a bunch of dust. In the shop is ideal, but even out in the field, as long as there's no activity around us, we can go ahead and pull this out, inspect the inside of these filters. If we got a little film like we normally do, like we have in here, it's a good idea to get a rag, wipe that out, get your new filter, make sure you get it seated in there like so. Take your cap, lock it into place, and put the yellow tab back in, okay? And now we're ready to go. Now, what I want to talk about is the pre-cleaner system on these machines. It's important to understand what we're doing to pre-clean the air going into our air filter. That way you can troubleshoot it, and if we got any problems, you know where to go first. So what we have here is our pre-cleaner box. I've gone ahead and removed the bolts from this screen so I can show you what this box looks like inside. So we've got these tubes. We've got 8 spinner tubes in this pre-cleaner box here. And what it's doing is, as the air comes in, it's getting that air spinning, and it's spinning off the dirt, and it's collecting inside of this box. As that box fills up with dirt, we've got our exhaust that is pulling a vacuum out of this box right here and keeping that box clean of any kind of dirt buildup. So essentially what you have is you have air coming into here, getting cleaned first into that box, and then the rest of the air will go into the air filter. Now, keep in mind, if any of these tubes get plugged up with dirt, grass, leaves, anything like that, you will start to see that your air filter life diminished. So if you aren't getting what you think you should in the life of your air filter, the first thing you need to check is these tubes right here and make sure they are free and clear of any kind of debris. You shouldn't have to get in there very often. This screen should do a pretty good job, but anytime this screen maybe gets damaged, it might allow some trash buildup in there. It won't hurt anything if you open up this screen and get some air in there and blow it out. There's nothing in here that you can really hurt, so don't be afraid occasionally to get in here. Keep these free and clear, and if you do that, you should get really good life out of your air filter. Okay, so the cooling package is in the rear of the machine here. So we've got an access panel right here to get to it. And then we've got a door here that we can open up to the actual radiator. So we've got the radiator right here, and we got the AC condenser right here. Make sure we're getting in here daily, blowing that out, and keeping that dirt free. Now on the fuel system, we've got the primary fuel filter right here with the water bowl, and we've got the secondary fuel filter right here. Now after the first 50 to 100 hours, we're going to be replacing these filters, and then after every 500 hours, or really once a season, these filters will get replaced. The crankcase breather sits right here next to the primary fuel filter, and that's going to be every 1,000 hours. Now make sure anytime we get into this crankcase breather that we're in a really clean environment. We don't want to get any kind of dirt in here. The engine oil. These John Deere engines come with break-in oil. So after the first 100 hours, we don't want to go over 250, but after maybe the first 100 hours, 2 weeks or so of runtime, we're going to replace that engine oil with our standard oil that's in the back of the operator's manual. Then after that, it's going to be every 250 hours. We're also going to be replacing the oil filter, which is right here on the front of the tank. The belt, the serpentine belt on the engine, we want to pay close attention to the stationary idler and the tensioner here. Every 250 hours, we want to be replacing that stationary idler and that belt tensioner. Again, these machines run in a really harsh environment, and we don't want to see any kind of collateral damage. If one of those pulleys were to seize up, then you're going to break your belt. That belt's going to get into your reversing fan. That's going to come apart, and that reversing fan is going to get into your radiator. So you're going to really have a lot of collateral damage there. So make sure every 250 hours, just as you're doing the oil change on your machine, you might as well change the stationary idler and the tensioner on this. Now, it is important to note that you cannot get a John Deere over-the-counter part for those idlers. You need to get a Flory part number. We put a special bearing in that tensioner and that stationary idler that's going to hold up to this environment. So if your dealer is a John Deere dealer, make sure they're not giving you the stock John Deere part. Make sure they're giving you the Flory spec part on those. Now the DPF. So these DPFs are meant to capture soot, ash, diesel particulates, and they will regen and clean themselves throughout the life of the machine. Now these machines run at a very high duty cycle, so they're always running hot, which is really what these engines like and what these DPFs like. So I don't anticipate this being a regular maintenance item, but if this DPF ever gets full, make sure that you take it to an authorized John Deere dealership and have it cleaned through them. Do not go to a third party without the John Deere approval. But as hard as these machines run, there's a really good chance that you won't ever have to touch this DPF. Okay, so the battery is located right here in front of the hydraulic tank. So inside this battery compartment, we have 2 high amp fuses, and we have our master disconnect switch. Now, I want to point out that master disconnect switch is not going to protect the machine. If you turn that off, it's not going to protect the machine if you decide to start welding on it. If you want to weld on this machine, you've got to unhook the battery cables, you've got to unhook the ECU, and also the +1 system inside the cab. So I point out these high amp fuses for the purpose of troubleshooting. So if you ever run into an electrical issue where you're just not getting power, usually fuses are the first place people check. But keep in mind, we've got 2 high amp fuses right back here next to the battery that you should also be checking. The fuses are located inside the cab underneath the right armrest, right here underneath this door. And each one of those fuses is laid out in the operator's manual saying what it's for. So on our tires, we talked about this before, but we want 25 PSI in the rear tires, and we want 18 to 20 PSI in the front. The rear hubs here, after the first 50 hours, we're going to be replacing the hub oil, and then after that, it's going to be once a season. And you want it, when you fill these, you want to fill them about half full. So you want this drain plug sitting at about 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Fill it up in that position, and once it reaches the top of that plug, then that's exactly where we want that oil level to be. Now, if we ever need to tow this machine, to disengage the hubs, what you do is you'll take this cap off right here, you'll flip it around so the nipple gets pushed inside, reattach the cap, and that will disengage the hub. Now, of course, you got to do that on the left and right side. When we tow these vehicles, it's not meant to tow them down the road at any kind of high speed. It's meant to tow them out of a spot, maybe you're stuck or just in a bad spot. Keep it under 10 miles an hour, and really don't want to be towing them for any kind of long distance. Now on the front tires, we've got bearings in here that need to be packed with grease once a season. Now on the front and the rear, we've got lug bolts that need to be tightened after the first day of runtime, and then after the first week of runtime, and then usually just kind of once a season, check those lug nuts and make sure everything's staying tight. On the fan, the fan shaft is directly mounted to the flywheel. And I point that out any time that we're going to replace or remove that fan shaft. We need to make sure that we take note of the way it's indicated on that flywheel. And so when we do replace it, we got to put it in the exact same orientation it was in. Whenever we're replacing fan blades on this, we need to replace all 6 fan blades at the same time so this fan stays balanced. On the hydraulic system for our tank, we want to make sure that we keep this tank about 3/4 of the way full. We need an air gap here in the tank to allow it to breathe. So anytime that we're replacing the hydraulic oil, make sure we're not filling it all the way to the top. The suction filter for this tank is located here on the front, and we want to replace that filter after the first 50 hours of runtime, and then every 500 hours or once a year should be good enough. So we've got some wear items here on the head that we need to keep our eye out on. These wire teeth here, when they're brand new, they're going to be 3.5 inches long, and we want to replace these wire teeth when they get to about 2.25 inches long. The problem is if we go further than that, if we let them get really, really short, we lose the flexibility in these wire teeth. And when we lose that flexibility, we start to put wear and stress on our time bar bearings right here. Now these bearings are not greasable. As long as we can keep these free of tree rope and replace these wire tines when they're supposed to be, these should last you a full season without an issue. And especially if you're taking the time to adjust your head properly, you should get really good life out of these bearings. Now, if one of these bearings do go out, really the telltale sign is you're going to hear a knock. So every time that head goes around, you're going to hear this repetitive knock, knock, knock. And so what you want to do when you hear that knock, you need to stop what you're doing, pick the head up, and then you're going to come in here and you're going to check each one of these time bars to find out which one of these bearings went out. And how you do that is you can either get a crescent wrench, clamp it on this riser right here, or just use your hands and go through and try and see if there's any kind of play in any of these time bars. And when you find the one that you actually have some play in, then you're going to figure out if it is it the left side or the right side that went out, because what happens is they'll get loose on you. And so you want to replace that right away. If you let that go, what happens is if say this bearing right here went out and it starts to get loose right here, well then you're going to wallow out the hole on your time bar tab, and when that hole gets wallowed out, then you're going to have to replace this whole time bar. So when you hear that knock, stop what you're doing, find out which bearing went out, and then replace it. And it's a good idea anytime we've got a break, end of the day, beginning of the day, check for tree rope on the bearings, check for tree rope on your drive motor, check for tree rope on the hub over here. That will be the first thing that will shorten the life on any of these components. Now I do want to point out over here on this spindle, we've got a spindle and a hub on this end plate here, and that hub has a bearing in it that will need to be packed with grease once a year. Now on this side of the machine, let's talk about the AC system. Inside the cab, right against this right wall inside here, is where our AC unit sits, and it's in a tight little spot. So what we've done is we've provided this access panel here to get to the filter on the AC unit. Now that filter shouldn't have to be serviced very often, but in order to get to it, you're going to remove this panel here, get the filter, and you can wash it out, you can blow it out and replace it. Make sure it's dry when you do put it back in there. As long as we can keep that free and clear of dirt, your AC system should get good life. And then we've got these drain plugs down here, right underneath it. Now we want to make sure these drain plugs are free and clear of any kind of dirt, debris. What happens is, of course, in these environments, we've got water dripping down, and we've got a lot of dust in the area, so inevitably these will get caked up with mud. As long as you see drips coming out of here with the AC system on, you know everything's free and clear, and it's draining properly. If you don't, make sure you get in here and clean these up. Maybe you have to stick a toothpick up in there and clear out any kind of mud. What happens is if these do get plugged up, then it's not, the AC system is not allowed to drain the water, so that water will build up inside the AC unit, inside the cab, and eventually it's going to overflow and spill into the cab. So periodically make sure these drain hoses are free and clear of any kind of mud, and then everything should work just great. Thanks for watching the video on the 34 series sweeper. One thing I do want to point out is all the information we talked about is right here in the operator's manual. The maintenance schedule is all summarized in the back. The fluids and how much of it to use, what specific types to use are in here. All the filters that we talked about, the oil, the fuel, the air filters, they're all in a table summarized with the part numbers, the fuses, the warning icons on the display screen. They're all in this operator's manual. How to adjust the machine, it's all right here. So get familiar with this, read it through, and if you got any further questions, contact your local Flory rep or your local dealer.